You can tell somewhat that those young ladies are sisters, can you not? Imagine you are driving on 75 and a police car pulls you over for going too fast, and your response is something like this: "Well, officer, I don't feel authentic going just 65 miles an hour. When I drive, I try to be guided by my deep inner voice, and my deep inner voice was telling me today, you can go 90. Matter of fact, you should go 90. So the officer, don't tell me that you need to impose your rules on me. When I'm driving, I have to be free. But we have a word for those kinds of people. Those are called speeders or nuts, whichever you choose, I think. Imagine an IRS person knocks on your door and says the government has noticed that you haven't paid your taxes for the last 10 years. And you try this. I understand that paying taxes may work for other people, but for me, it would feel kind of hypocritical. You see, if I were to give some of my money to the government, it would not reflect my deepest personal passions and values. So don't impose your rules on my money. I have to be free. We have a word for those kinds of people. We call them tax evaders. And one more. Imagine a man dating a woman. Imagine this man saying, I feel that being faithful to you, just one woman, would be much too confining for me. I have grown to be in touch with my core inner self, and when my core inner self sees a woman and around who's really, really attractive, my core inner self wants to stare and to chase and to see if I can get her to respond. We have a name for those kinds of people. We call them, well, I'm not even going to say what we call them, but you can vote on it sometime. We're in a series called The Reason for God, and today's question is Christianity a kind of straitjacket? The early 20th century social activist, Emma Goldman, who one of my students this morning in our Sunday school class said that person's actually a communist, I didn't know that, called Christianity this: the leveler of the human race, the breaker of man's will to dare and to do, an iron net, a straitjacket, if you would, which does not let that person expand and grow. You know, in other words, they see Christianity as a kind of don't do thing, and so when they stretch the don't do thing over your life as a Christian, then you don't do, and so it's a constriction, it's a kind of straitjacket, if you would. Is a belief in an absolute truth the enemy of freedom? That's the question that Tim Keller takes in the book in this chapter. Does becoming a Christian mean that somebody gets to tell you, here's what you have to do, and here's how you have to think, and here's how you have to live? Would there be too many sexual restrictions if I was going to be a Christian? What would this thing called faith do to my life? Could I still be an open-minded person? Would I not be able to decide for myself what I think is right and what I think is wrong? And all of those, I will just tell you, are really important questions. John Ortberg tells the true story of a little boy by the name of Frankie. Frankie is 3 to 4 years old. Now you got to picture this in your mind. 3 to 4 year old who one day his mother catches him. He has rolled up to the window. He's pulled the chair up, pushed it against the window, and he is inside the curtain. And all she can see below the curtain are his 2 little white legs coming out. She was kind of mystified about what in the world he might be doing, and so she leaned ever so close to him, and she could hear him repeating the words, I got to get out of here. I got to get out of here. I got to get out of here. Now imagine what it would be like raising that child for the next 15 years with just, I got to get out of here. But is that what it means to live under the reign of God? That it is so restricting that you find yourself, I've got to move on. I couldn't help but think of Christopher Hitchens, an atheist and author who died in December of 2011, who wrote the book, God is Not Great, where he says in that book, if the Bible were true, it would be a disaster because it would mean living eternally under a divine, totalitarian despot, and it would be like living in a celestial North Korea, but worse because at least you can die and get out of North Korea. Now, that description got him lots of laughs, but the fact is, God is anything but that. He's anything but that. That's oftentimes the view that people get of him, but I will tell you, he is anything but that. So what we're going to do over the next few minutes is talk about the issue of freedom. And we're going to divide it into three things: the problem of freedom, the possibility of freedom, and the practice of freedom. So first of all, let's dive in. If you've got your outline in front of you, we're going to move forward. The problem, first of all, of freedom. And that is this: we can be free from something, and that something is ourselves and our sin. Now let's talk about that for a moment. Freedom initially and importantly is freedom from something. When I use the word sin and ourselves, I wonder what you think. If you've grown up in and around the church, you know the sin word. You know that it's that which separates you from God. But oftentimes, we get so pleased with ourselves that we don't ever really need separation or freedom from ourselves. We like ourselves so much, all we do is wrap ourselves in a light coat of Christianity. So much so that one writer says there are a lot of carnal Christianity around. Now, let me just tell you what that looks like. If you've ever been in a Baptist business meeting when somebody didn't act very nice, that's a carnal Christian. Just let me tell you point blank. When we are mean-spirited, and I can give you names. I'm not going to name anybody in this church. I'll name them in the churches that I've been in. But if we're mean-spirited, I've told the Wednesday night crowd the story of the first man I encountered who was incredibly mean. I mean, deacon in the church, leader in the community, but everybody said, well, that's just the way he is. And I've just got to tell you, no, it is not the way you should be. Are you kidding me? If he's accepted Christ and he's mean-spirited, that's an oxymoron. I mean, you can't be Christ-like and live with a frown on your face and elbows out saying, I'm right. And this man lived that every day of his life. And I will never forget him being mean to me on numerous occasions. Until finally, in public one night, he was so mean to me publicly that there were a line of deacons setting in line to talk to him afterwards. Now, my only problem with that is, if he's mean to me in public, why don't y'all speak up in public? Because they had gotten used to assuming that's just him. And I want to tell you, I don't want to be just me. I want to be more than just me. I want to be Christ-like in my heart, my mind, my spirit. I want, when people see me, I want them to say, you know what, Dan used to be like that, but Dan's like this now. Dan's doing better. He's making progress in his journey with Christ. I want to be free from something so I can be something that Christ is pleased with. My fear is that we settle for what I would call pseudo-transformation. We just kind of put a little bit of Christianity on us, not enough to change us, but just enough to make us a little better. It's a dangerous thing. We've got to be set free from something. Dallas Willard says it this way: spirituality, wrongly understood, is pursued is a major source of human misery and rebellion against God. How many people have I known who in their lives, they came to know Christ, but they never got the joy of anything related to knowing Christ? So what I've done is given you a list of questions there that you can use. Matter of fact, carry this list with you. Ask yourself these questions at the beginning or the end of each day. Am I spiritually inauthentic? Neva was right in that Christ was a bit weird. To follow Christ is to assume a kind of lifestyle that will, by its very nature, rub against the grain of the world in which we live in. But it can either rub good or it can rub bad. It can either rub agitating with a fist, or it can rub in a way that says, wow, what's different about them? Inauthentic. Secondly, am I becoming judgmental or exclusive or proud? We talked a little bit about that in our class this morning. I've never been a Homer Simpson fan, but some of you evidently watched this thing. It's been kind of a cultural thing. But Homer Simpson once had a fundamentalist neighbor who he asked, when Homer asked him what he had been doing at this Christian camp that he went to, he said, oh, we went away for the Christian camp. We were learning to be more judgmental while we were there. Thirdly, am I becoming more approachable or less? In other words, does my differentness always have, notice that motion I made a minute ago? This guy's differentness was like elbows hitting me in the chest. His differentness was being right and being mean about being right. But nobody had ever called him on it. Well, guess what? I did, and he tried to beat me senseless. He did not win, by the way. Fourthly, am I growing weary of pursuing spiritual growth? Have I just settled for mediocre Christianity? Am I just nice and warm about I come to church and I give my tithe, but don't expect me to really change. Fifthly, am I measuring my spiritual life in superficial ways? Superficial ways are the things that I just named for you. As good as some of those might be, they are not the kind of journey with Christ that he wants for you. So the problem of freedom is that we've got to be free from something, and that something is ourselves and our sin. But the second part, the possibility of freedom. We're not simply free from something, but we're free for something, and that really leans into the fact that God wants our transformation. John Ortberg calls the single most important principle is the principle of spiritual transformation. He says there is an immense difference between training to do something and trying to do something. And this is the key to transformation. Have you ever tried to swim and couldn't? Well, and you just never decided to go back again. That's trying. But if you trained, if you decided you were going to do that, and you invested the time to do that, and suddenly you began to swim. And it's that true of anything, isn't it? Learning how to play Bach, the keyboard, by spending years of practice is not the hard way to do it. It is, in fact, the only way to do it. So how do we unlock this door for authenticity? We throw ourselves against the spiritual disciplines. Now, what are spiritual disciplines? Let me give you a disciplined person. A person who makes room in their lives. It's someone who does the right thing at the right time, in the right way, with the right spirit. Now, that sounds easy, doesn't it? It sounds almost impossible. But a disciplined follower of Christ is someone who discerns when laughter and gentleness and silence and healing works. Or they also know that sometimes prophetic indignation is called for, and it offers it promptly, effectively, and lovingly. And I will tell you, I have not perfected that, but I try incredibly hard. So we are free for something, we are free from something, and now the practice of freedom. We'll spend the rest of our time on that, the practice of freedom, and that is this: we can be free forever. When folks talk to me about heaven, I always remind them that heaven starts here on earth, and that John is very clear in his gospel when he talks about eternal life, because eternal life for John is it happens the moment we receive Christ, and from that moment on, we are on our journey to heaven. And that eternal life starts, in fact, on planet Earth, and that we can be free forever because we can, in fact, train in the spiritual gymnasium of our lives. Paul says as much to Timothy. And I gave you the Greek words in parentheses there to get you to see how they're connected together. It says, train yourself unto godliness, for while bodily training, again the word gymnasium is underneath both of those words, is of some value, godliness is of value in every way, as it holds promise for the present life and also for the life to come. So what I did is take the rest of our time and develop it around the practice of freedom and how we can live out this life with Christ in freedom fully. And so training in the spiritual gymnasium of our lives means that you always have a training partner to spot you. Now, for those of you who've been in and around gyms, you know that if you lift a lot of weight, which I do not, I'm sure that surprises some of you because of my build and my utter size, that you always have to have somebody to spot you. That means you do not want to lift a lot of weight that, in fact, if you can't handle it, it lands on you. You have someone to spot you because they're there to walk with you. They're there to remind you of the accountability. They're there to make the difference in your life. You always have somebody to spot you. You know the difference between a person who sails and a person who takes a motorboat? Those who sail, although they do have motors and usually in most of those, but those who sail depend upon the wind, and it's the same word, by the way, for the Spirit, to guide you. But then there are those of us who just say, I want my motorboat. I'm going to be in charge of my boat, and I'm going to take my boat when and where I want to take it. Life at its best is when we have a training partner, and that training partner is Christ, or better yet, even on planet Earth, for some of us, not better, but certainly more important in terms of feeling that difference, having somebody walk with us is incredibly important. Training. Training in the spiritual gymnasium also means you already have what you need when you start. In other words, God wired you in a way, He didn't wire you in a way that's so against what He wants for your life. It's wired in there. You just have to uncover it. For instance, if I want to draw close to Christ, in my spiritual walk, I need nurturing. I do it significantly different than Neva does. I read and I journal and I have solitude. Neva needs outside. She walks. She experiences nature. She's outside. Whenever she can be, she's in the moment of God's creation, and that is for her a powerful time. It also speaks to me about there is no season of my life where Christ cannot be Lord in my life. There is no season before I'm 30 or after I'm 30. There is no season where it's better for Christ to be important in my life. All of life counts. And then finally, you almost have what you need to sustain you. In other words, we always have within us what God needs to have in us to get our lives started. We just have to get in the rhythm of God. Life is filled with joy and sorrow. Life is filled with pain and absolute ecstatic moments. I give you the example of a young couple that sits over in this section, the Biddle family. Some of you know I married them about a year or so ago. And they've been going through, Alex had a seizure the other day, out of the blue, never had a seizure. And then this weekend, if you've heard anything about Lexington news, you will hear about a couple that was leaving from her 24th birthday at a restaurant late Friday night, and they were mugged, and the husband was killed, and the wife, who is the sister to Melanie, was shot in the leg, and she went through surgery yesterday. Now, I've just got to tell you, when she texted me and said, I need to try to understand what's going on in my life, and I wish she had been here last week, we talked about pain and suffering. Life has a rhythm to it. And just know that there are going to be good moments that we need to cling to, and then there are going to be incredibly painful moments that we need to cling to just as much, because God will teach us something in those incredibly painful times. Tim Keller quotes a letter from an early Christian, and I think it's profound. Diognetus is the name of the person writing the letter. It's a letter written in New Testament times. And he says in that letter, we share our table with all. He's a Christian, obviously. We do not share our bed with all. Now think about that. Keller says, in the ancient world, pagans were promiscuous with their bodies and stingy with their money. Does that sound familiar to you all right now? Anything that sound very culturally true right now to that statement? In the 21st century world, people in America are promiscuous with their bodies, but stingy with their money. Does that sound close to the truth? Followers of Jesus, he says, however, of Jesus were promiscuous with their money, but stingy with their bodies. Isn't that interesting? Frederick Buechner wrote that every age produces its own fairy tales. He says, because there is something inside all of us who, in fact, believes that what we see in this world is not the whole story. And so we tend to write fairy tales. You know, fairy tales where frogs become princes and ugly ducklings become swans and wooden puppets become real people. Well, now there is this movie out called Frozen. And I know I mentioned it to my Sunday school class who have children, and they booed and hissed me because I had not seen that movie yet. I have seen the movie portrayed by my granddaughter many, many times. I've heard her, let it go, let it go. I mean, she sings it from the bottom of her belly. And so I, obviously, being the student that I am, I go online and find out what is it about this movie. It's the same kind of fairy tale. It's about Elsa, who is this fearless optimist. I will just tell you, that is in us. That is in us. We want to believe that there is more to life than that which we can see, that there are fairy tales, and that, yes, the fairy tale of the resurrection is no fairy tale. It is the truth. And it is the truth because it becomes real to each of us.